So I want to talk about Thor. And I specifically want to talk about the Jason Aaron fans out there and the Thor fans. I have a real problem with you guys. If you want to know why, stay tuned for the video. Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. This video is all about Thor. We are going to talk about Jane Foster. We're going to talk about Thor. We're going to talk about Unworthy Thor. I'm going to show you guys some books. And then I'm also going to spend a little bit of time talking about a spec comic that no one is talking about. At least to my knowledge, no one is talking about. And we're going to talk about it in this video. And then I'm also going to show you guys a couple of really cool books that I have in my collection related to the things that we are talking about right now. So, my bone to pick with Jason Aaron fans and Thor fans is that you guys are not as fanatical as you need to be. And what I mean by that is that if I mention Moon Knight, I get messages, I get comments from people saying Moon Knight is the greatest, and they go on. If I mention Wolverine fans are, let me tell you, bub, why Wolverine is the best. There are certain sets of fans that are very passionate about their character. The Thor guys are kind of like, read them or don't, Thor is cool. And my issue is that I've been missing out. I historically have never been a big Thor fan. And the reason for that is that I've tried to read a lot of the Silver Age stuff and I struggle. I'm a fan of language and words, and I struggle with the thee and the thous and the thoust and the dost. I struggle with that with Thor. And so whenever I think of Thor or a Thor comic, I automatically think about that and that funky font that they use that drives me crazy. But I started reading some of this newer Jason Aaron stuff, and it is really good. I am really enjoying it. And so I started reading the Thor series with Jane Foster. I've kind of moved now into reading the Unworthy Thor, and it's really, really well done. So I wish you guys had raised the red flag, had put a hand up, had called a flag on the play to let me know that I need to look into this, but I'm definitely enjoying it. Now, what prompted this is that a subscriber to the channel reached out to me with a theory that he had about what's going to happen in the MCU, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. I thought it was a good theory, and I started to look into it to better understand where he was coming from and to better understand whether there was something there. And we're going to talk more about that in just a second. But that's what prompted me to start reading the new Thor series where Jane Foster becomes Thor. And there's a lot of people that don't like that. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really have a dog in the fight. I am a fan of original characters with their own unique identities, but I'm not necessarily mad at Jane Foster becoming the Thor. I'm not mad at the fact that Jane Foster could become Thor in the MCU. I'm not really mad about that. And maybe it's because I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm not quite certain. But what I did find curious as I was reading that issue #1 was that Jason Aaron kind of anticipated that. He actually, over the course of the story, has Jane Foster struggling with the idea of her being Thor. Thor himself is struggling with the idea that he is no longer Thor and that there is a woman who is now deemed to be worthy of carrying the hammer of Thor. And then you also have these frost giants that were sent by Malekith to Midgard, who are wrecking shop on Midgard. And they basically taunt and tease Jane Foster. And they're like, this puny girl, etc., etc. And they basically make fun of her. And it's essentially a reflection of what's happening in, the larger community, if you will. But here's the funny thing. That puny girl goes on within that comic to basically wreck shop. She goes on to really mollywop these frost giants. She, over the course of the book, has the hammer of Thor doing some things that Thor himself never has thought possible. And ultimately, he comes to kind of sort of respect what it is that she's able to do and the fact that she has been deemed worthy and he unfortunately is not worthy. And so I kind of dig that. I honestly had never read it before. I just heard a lot of the stuff that was out there, but I'm glad glad that I actually decided to read it for myself. And again, I am actually enjoying it. I have moved into the Unworthy Thor because I was curious about a couple of things like Thor's lost arm. So I wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand, what he was doing with his time now that he was no longer Thor and he was now Odinson after having turned over the title of Thor to basically Jane Foster. And so I'm maybe 3 issues into the Unworthy Thor. And again, enjoying the writing. I think the artwork in a couple of the issues could be better, but as a whole, I am enjoying the story and I'm glad that I decided to actually make the jump into checking this out. Now, what was the impetus behind me actually doing this? What was it that the subscriber reached out to me to talk about, especially as it relates to the MCU? What it was this thought right here. For Jane Foster to become Thor, Thor himself must first become unworthy. How did Thor become unworthy? And isn't that potentially an important moment in time? Because that is the transition where basically the door is open for Jane Foster to step through. And so you have to go back to Original Sin, issue number 7, to actually figure out how it was that Thor became unworthy. And at that issue, we see that Nick Fury actually whispers in the ear of Thor something, and we don't quite know what it was, but whatever that whisper was, it caused Thor to basically become unworthy of the title and also unworthy of the hammer. And so that was, I think, a pretty important moment. That's where basically the hammer falls to the moon. Thor is unable to actually pick it up. There's a host of other people that come around to try to pick the hammer up over the course of what happens, and none of them are able to actually pick it up besides this masked woman or unnamed woman who ultimately we know becomes or is Jane Foster. So this moment where the hammer falls, where Thor becomes unworthy, I think is a pretty important moment. And it's a moment that no one seems to be talking about in spec land, right? There's a lot of spec that's going on right now, as we've talked about, but I haven't seen anyone actually talk about this. For Jane Foster to become Thor, Thor must first become unworthy. How and where does Thor become unworthy? In issue number 7 of Original Sin. Now I can tell you, I actually read the Original Sin series almost 2 years ago. I actually picked up the full run of it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the whole Watcher, Nick Fury, story, but I never picked up on this nuance of Thor becoming unworthy with my original read, partly because I was never really a Thor fan, so it didn't really say anything to me until, again, the subscriber raised the issue and I went back and looked at it. And I'm so glad that I did because of all the great reading that I've been able to do over the last couple of days and the additional reading that I'm about to do, because there's definitely some good stuff there. So we're going to see how this plays out. This Original Sin could become an important book. I'm not quite sure whether there's something there or not. I just thought that it was really cool to realize that it was Original Sin number 7 that Thor actually became unworthy. And so there you have it. So anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed the first part of this thing. Now I want to show you guys some of the books that I have in my collection. A couple of these books I've actually picked up recently, but the vast majority of them have actually been in my collection for a while. I am not the biggest Thor fan, so I didn't necessarily go out and buy these books. I actually have these books in one case because a subscriber gave it to me, and in other cases because I picked up a collection that actually had these books in them. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the first book. This is Thor number 1. This is basically where Jane Foster becomes Thor. This is basically the first appearance. It's not really a cameo, but it is a first appearance of Jane Foster as the new Thor. And then in issue number 2, this is actually the first full appearance of Jane Foster as Thor. That number 1 has been deemed by the market to be the more important book versus this book right here, but I have both of them, again, thanks to the guy that sold me his collection. This book right here, The Mighty Thor number 705, is important because it is actually the death of Jane Foster. I'm not sure how much time passed between issue number 1 of that one and issue number 705 of The Mighty Thor. I didn't get a chance to look that up, but this is a really, really gorgeous cover from Art Germ. And a subscriber of the channel actually gave me this book probably 8 months ago or something like that, but definitely pleased to have this book in a collection. And it is a really, really nice copy that will probably be going off to CGC. So the next couple of books are The Unworthy Thor. I actually picked this up as a lot recently, and unfortunately, this number 1 is actually damaged. This is where I had an issue with an eBay seller who sent this book out damaged. I was able to get a credit back, but I'm actually on the hunt to try to track down issue number 1 of this because I'm definitely enjoying it. Here is issue number 2 of The Unworthy Thor, issue number 3 of Unworthy Thor. Here is 4. And then the very last one that I have is issue number 5 in that run. I'm not sure if it wraps up at 5, to be honest with you, but that's the last that was being sold in that lot. And kind of as I mentioned, I think the sleeper pick, the sleeper spec pick might be this book right here. It is Original Sin number 7. And this was a fantastic story that was done back in the day. Limited series of 8. This is issue number 7. And in this book, again, this is where we find out that Thor's, given that secret that makes him unworthy from Nick Fury. I actually was able to pick up, I think it was 8 copies. I think I picked up 8 copies of this. Someone had a lot for sale on eBay and they were relatively inexpensive. So I went ahead and picked them all up. Fingers crossed that something happens with it. Because if it does, I am prepared. I'm playing catch up, but I am prepared now. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this. Shout out to the Thor fans, the Jason Aaron fans. I love you guys. If you guys need to reach out to me, feel free to do so. RegieCollects on Instagram and RegieCollects@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can stay abreast of all the content that I release on a weekly basis. And it also makes you eligible for the giveaways that I do every single week. Take care.